Hey guys, welcome back to Foul Play. This time I'm actually in person in Maryland with Gemma. And Gemma and I are joined by Jean and Teresa. And Gemma, why don't you explain what we're going to be talking about today?
Everybody's been waiting for this because we made a big announcement about this in capital letters a couple weeks ago. Actually, we're all in Maryland. So that doesn't mean that it's okay if somebody wants to get rid of us that we're all in one place. But anyway, so we're excited today because we've never done anything like this before. Shane and I have done a lot, like 70 podcasts together, but we've never done one with audio and video. But because this is such an important topic and an important focus, that's what we're doing. And so we're going to ask you to settle in because this is something that is critical to all of us. In fact, I'm actually going to read the first sentence of the focus because I want to make sure everybody understands exactly what you're going to hear. So the focus of this interview is on the challenges that Jean and Teresa and many other survivors have faced with the institutions that betrayed them. And those institutions are the Roman Catholic Church, especially the Archdiocese of Baltimore, government, local and federal, because the FBI is still preventing the Malecki family from looking at records that belong to them, but mostly our local law enforcement. And finally, as I said, law enforcement, because we know that police officers were involved in this mess. We're going to go back and start with the early legal battles, and a lot of you know about the Doe Roe case, so we're going to go back to the 90s, and we're going to ask Jean to talk about that first and tell us about the Doe Roe case, how that came to be, and your role in that.
Okay, well, thanks, Gemma and Shane, for doing this. And Teresa, I'm glad we have this chance to chat a bit together. It's been a lot of years, and we've done things differently, but we have continued to do things, and that to me that's the key. It was in spring 1992. I was 38, which by on the side, that is the age of the statute of limitations now. So if even if now I was remembering it at a time that was appropriate or acceptable, it was now. It took a number of years for me to finally talk about it outwardly. So it was, I felt as if like a 14-year-old, I literally still have no memory other than what I've remembered. Things like some of the fun things I have purposely tried, sat with classmates, done different things, been reminded by them who they saw me as, so that I wouldn't just be stuck with these horrible memories. But I felt as if a 14-year-old sat down next to me and said, I have something to tell you. Now, I had already remembered my uncle and abuse that happened at his hands, but this started the process of these memories that were, I was throwing up memories of Joseph Maskell and Neil Magnus sexually abusing me. So these are very disgusting memories. There's no chronological order to it. They're stored, as I've spoken to a number of trauma experts, in certain part of the brain, different than your regular memory, a segment or whatever part that is, because it's so traumatic. It just gets sucked into this one particular area. So when it comes, it just drops, and yet it unfolds, and you feel as if you were in the experience for the first time. So sometimes here I am, 38-year-old woman curled up on the floor, feeling as if I am being horribly abused by these men And it's the first time I'm actually experiencing it. It was, for me, a nightmare. It was not just a nightmare. It was, I hoped I was crazy because I thought I was all together. I was now a spiritual director. I was very involved within the church. And I really felt like I must have really gone off the deep end because I couldn't even made up what it was these people were doing to me. So the work began. Then later in the year, I had a number of meetings with the Catholic Church representatives. At the first one that was with Rich Woy, he literally held up a manila folder and said, "You're the first person to ever voice a complaint about this man." And I think my sister and I said he might have had one piece of paper in it. So I, as a survivor who thinks I'm nuts anyway now, think I'm totally responsible, not just for what I'm saying, but proving it, because he's telling me I'm the only person saying it. So it just intensified my nuttiness, or so I thought. I had two meetings, formal meetings with them, and where I gave a statement. After the first one, Joseph Maskell, who was in his 50s, was removed from Holy Cross Parish and sent to the Institute of Living in Connecticut to be evaluated. Then I had the second one where I shared with them adults that I remembered. And so at a certain point, they told me that they couldn't get any corroboration. They couldn't find any proof of my allegations, and they were going to have to let him back out. So in 1994, when I agreed to do the lawsuit, which I had never, ever thought I would ever do, where I would be participating in a suit that would be at the statute. It was the Archdiocese of Baltimore, the School Sisters of Notre Dame, and it was against Joseph Maskell. And at that time in 1994, some people had started speaking to the lawyers, and Teresa was one who had, I had never met. I didn't meet Teresa until 2016, but she had an experience that was more common, or to my experience, more. Now, the reason that I said I would do this lawsuit wasn't to bankrupt the Catholic Church. I am not a church basher. I am not out to empty out their coffers. I have no belief in that I will get rich for any of this. But they were letting him back out, and not just back out, but into a parish near where I lived. And now I have said these things. And I knew, because I had begun remembering, that now he was going to be around kids. And I had this little kid in me that was only 14, 15 years old. So I knew the fear of what that meant. Then I also knew that he had threatened me with a gun when I was young. So I had these images of him coming in my back window to shoot me and my kids. And so the other reason that I said yes was because back when we were in school, I graduated in 1971. The statute of limitations stated then that I had to report within 3 years of when the abuse stopped in order to hold anyone accountable. When I was explained that, I can say to this day, I believe I was in my 3-year statute of limitation period. I had never remembered anything. I could have fallen over Joseph Maskell and wouldn't have known who the hell he was. And the things that it's not you remember, now you've remembered. I have been remembering for years. It comes in bits and pieces like a puzzle. It is excruciatingly painful at times. It can take a year just to go from the beginning of the thought of something that just is visceral reaction to a full-fledged memory of what happened, and therapy to deal with the impact it had on me, even though I'm only just remembering a year before. So I truly believe then, and I believe now, that I was in my 3-year statute of limitation period. And I had a right to hold that man accountable. But as we know, that did not happen. And one of the things that I feel is that I would never, because there were 3 parts to that. One was I was terrified. I've now told secret. I have now said these things, and no one did a damn thing about it. They did worse than that. They put him back out in a parish. They stopped paying for my, they had started paying for my therapy. And once they couldn't corroborate, they stopped the therapy payments, put him back out in a parish. So I was terrified. I believed, and still do, that I was in my statute of limitation period. And somebody else who had a memory of this experience, who affirmed this craziness in my head. Teresa, I'll be perfectly honest. I don't know if that I was glad or I was mad, because I would have rather been crazy. But that they were the 3 reasons that I agreed to take these systems and this monster. I'm not even going to call him a monster. I don't like to give them names that disconnect them from he made choices. He was a predator. He was a perpetrator. He was a ringleader. He was a mastermind of perpetrating sexual abuse on children. So that is how I started. The process was thinking they were going to help me. I was very involved. I believed they were going to take the ball and run with it. I thought they were going to give support to my family, because now I have these memories that and it went from that to I was left alone with my husband and my children, feeling like we had to fend for ourselves.
Teresa, could you explain to us your evolution of your involvement in that case?
Yeah, I had always thought I was crazy. I always had an ongoing memory of a lot of things that Maskell did to me. And I had told people that he was a pervert and that he liked to give me douches and enemas and take my clothes off. But I did not remember the actual rapes until I got involved. What happened was, when I received the letter about the sexual behaviors at Keogh during the years I was there, I was really, really happy, because like I said, I thought I was crazy. I knew what he had done to me. And my mom had just passed away horribly. And as I focused on it, I started remembering it didn't stop there. It wasn't just a douche. Then, as if the douche would have been all right. I mean, and I started having breakthrough memories. And I talked to the lawyers, and I said, at first I was going to be a witness, because I can verify that, yes, he'd like to take clothes off. Yes, he would touch me and do weird things. And I wanted to be a witness. But then I was waking up in the middle of the night screaming and telling Randy I was raped. And he was running around looking for the rapist. And it just turned my already upside down world worse. So I went into it with anger. I had a lot of anger because of I didn't learn anything at Keo those last 2 years. I just you know, I was lost. Ran off, married somebody I didn't even know, and I was angry about that. And when I knew that someone had the courage to come forth and report this, I was very, very much touched about your courage, Jean. And I do think it was good they kept us separate because, and they were mysterious about it. They wouldn't even say why we were separate, except, we weren't going to meet. And I was very, very happy to go after them and to tell the world that it wasn't right what happened at Keo.
Can I ask? I have a couple logistics questions that a lot of people that listen have asked about. Jean, could you review for us again who the defendants were in the suit that you and Teresa filed as co-plaintiffs, correct?
I
Okay.
became Jane Doe.
Okay.
And Teresa was Jane Roe.
Okay, so the defendants were, can you name the defendants and why you sued each defendant?
Joseph Maskell, he was being sued for, they had a whole list of things that he had done
Right.
that were against the law, to be doing that with a minor. I was suing him personally in order for him to be taken off the street. Murphy, he was the lawyer for the Archdiocese of Baltimore, and I was suing them because I believed that they knew that they were his employers. They were the ones that needed to be held accountable for what it sounds very nonchalant, but what their employees were doing,
Mm-hmm.
And especially with children involved. And then it was Harrison, who was for the School Sisters of Notre Dame. And that was because there was memory of nuns, but then also it was, again, I felt Teresa can say what she knows different with her background, but it was that they were in school and they knew, that they were bringing them to be held accountable for what did they know, what were their records, and what did we need in order to really truly hold this man to the higher state of the law.
So it wasn't until Teresa joined the suit that Richter was involved, was named. Is that correct, Teresa? Can you explain that?
When I told the lawyers that Maskell would take me to the gynecologist, and then I had memories of things that happened with the gynecologist. They asked about including him in the lawsuit, and I said yes, that happened. Sue him. And Lake, Shirley Lake, the lawyer that represented Victor, she was a textbook lawyer. I mean, she was harsh, but I mean, they have to be harsh. But well, all the lawyers, going to Harrison, by the way, I can't pass up an opportunity to say how much I hated him. When I found out, I actually went to a phone booth in another county, and I called his office and I asked for Mr. Harrison and said I wanted to hire Mr. Harrison, just to see if he really died. And they didn't tell me. I found out other ways.
Yeah,
but Miss Lake was a good lawyer. I mean, she was a battle person, and she represented Richter. But all the other lawyers that Jean mentioned, I had to endure their questions.
Before we ask you to share that experience, each of you, can one of you give us a little bit of information about the attorneys that were representing the two of you?
I'll start, Teresa, because my experience may be different than Teresa's because we were separate. We came with different things. Our personalities are different. I was, as you need to remember, I was in I was in the middle. I was a victim that should never have been in that situation. I'm going to say that right now. Any victim who feels they want to hold somebody accountable, make sure you have an advocate with you, somebody who is a trauma specialist. You need to make sure you have the people in place because you get triggered left, right, and upside down. There's all kinds of stuff. The way that they ask questions, the way that they talk to you, the way that they look at you, how many times they ask the question, who can be there with you. It just, to me, to me, it was, I liked Phil. It was Phil Dantes, Beverly Wallace, and then Jim Maggio came on. Phil had been someone my brother had known. And how Phil came into it was the Archdiocese. I fired Steve Tolley because he told me I wasted their time when I gave them the list of the adults who I had remembered. And I told him, well, he asked me if I had anyone else that I remembered. And he said, I thought they were girls. It's like, well, you didn't ask me, so I don't understand. So my husband fired him. And then Rich Hoy, when I called him to see if he'd pray with me, he said, no, get a lawyer. So my brother, there were two that we were looking at, and my brother knew Phil. So I went down and I signed on with Phil, gave him the $1 or whatever. And that was it, because nothing was happening with a lawsuit or anything. It's just in case Maskell decided to. Beverly Wallace was just his kind of like partner in crime, but it wasn't a lot of interacting until they started really, when I remembered Cathy Sesnick, when I remembered her death, my family literally drove me to Phil's office. And 3 of them went to the Enoch Pratt Library to look at microfiche because they were like, there was a nun who was murdered. And they went looking for that information. My brother took me to Phil and said, we need to tell you what else is going on here. So Phil, to me, he was what I needed. He respected that I was a victim and how I had to do things. Beverly Wallace became the cat's meow. I just love Beverly. I think that she, I think too, part of it was because it was a woman that was a part of that team, and it meant a lot to me. Not saying anything other than she has a great ability to. Jim Maggio came on board because he just knew he had to be a part of this. Mm-hmm. And Jim, he was the biggest sweetheart you could ever find, gentle and yet knew his stuff and was really right there. So they were the 3, and I felt very comfortable with all 3. Again, we might have had different experiences, but that was my feeling.
Teresa?
I got to know the 3 of them, and I'll never forget the first interview when I was telling them about Maskell's boat and how girls would be on that. And Maggio said, have you just gone through life not doing anything? Because I hadn't seen a therapist. And I said, yeah, I mean, shit happens. I just, dove into life. But I grew to like the 3 of them, especially Beverly. I could call her like when I got really upset and had the memories. She was always there on the phone for me. And I liked the 3 of them so much, I invited them. Randy and I got married in the middle of Doe Row, as if not enough was going on. And I invited the 3 of them to my wedding. And we had a great time. It was good.
I don't know if our listeners know that Jim went to Cardinal Gibbons, which was next door to Keogh, and knew and dated a lot of Keogh girls. So he actually also taught me how to smoke a cigar. That's my claim to fame with Jim Maggio.
Jean, I wanted to follow up with something that you mentioned a few minutes ago. You mentioned, I think, that during the trial is when you remembered a nun being killed. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So
it was not. No, it wasn't during the trial.
Okay.
I remember the nun being killed at the beginning of 1993.
Okay.
The trial didn't happen until, I think they presented it 94 or 95.
All right, yeah.
The microfiche thing.
I didn't.
I was just wanting you to go further into the microfiche or the microfiche. Is that how you say it? Fish? Microfiche.
He's so young. He's so young.
Anytime I go to the library to use it, I'm always like, is it fish or fish or fish?
That works, yeah.
I just wanted to hear more about how they took you presenting that information when you had those memories come back.
Well, the memories when I had them come back, it was with, of course, it was with our lawyers that I shared it, and then my family got a private detective, Dick Bussey, and he then started asking questions, and that's how we came about with that anonymous letter that was going to go out. But it seemed to me that it made sense to the lawyers who we were working with. I mean, it almost kind of was like the dots were coming together. I will say my experience of deposition, 21 hours of deposition, was none of it did they treat it like they believed it, or that it made sense, or that I was speaking English, So I would have to say that I was so beside myself with that experience that I came away. I was traumatized by it. So I came away just that they didn't believe anything I was saying, and I was running, 500 steps ahead of them, trying to appease them and say it in a way they could understand. So it just got thrown right in with everything else, Shane. They didn't treat anything like they believed it.
Right.
I'm sure that was something that they actually thought, this woman really is nuts.
Mm-hmm. Well, they treated me the same way that, they would say, like, and you say this and you say that. But I did have, at that point, my dad was in the background. He had supported me at that time. I did have to tell him about the lawsuit because I didn't want him reading about it at the Sun paper. And he would sort of prepare me for what those lawyers were going to do. And I went in there with an attitude. And at one point, Phil Dante said, we're gaining points with you because
not with me.
Well, they were asking me about the douchebag and the enemas and what was it. And then I gave them a long, drawn out explanation of the douchebag and the enema bag were one and the same apparatus. And I went into vivid detail about what happened with that. And then at one point, Phil said, lose the attitude. Because I got too much in their face. But yeah, they pissed me off. They really did. And I had to calm myself down. But the way they questioned me was like, you're making this up, you're fabricating this. And anything I said, they questioned like,
I want to ask Teresa about something that our viewers probably need clarification. Teresa, I have two things to ask you about. One is, what is the difference between a trial and a hearing? Because a lot of people took away from the keepers that this was a trial and it never got that far. So Teresa, can you explain the difference and how that all works?
Yeah, big difference. Whenever you file a lawsuit, the opposition is going to try to quash the lawsuit. They're going to try to make it go away. And they do that by following for hearings of different things. Like my dad had told me the statute of limitations was established law, and that was the big hurdle that he honestly didn't believe we could beat, even though, like you, Jean, I believe the memories from then on were well within the 3-year statute of limitations. That was the hearing. Did the statute of limitations bar us from filing the lawsuit? If we had won that hearing, then we would have gone to the trial where we could have brought in witnesses, and like my letters from the doctors would have come in, all kind of evidence would have come in, but they were successful in stopping us at the hearing, which is a preliminary matter before a trial. You have to settle all those matters before it's actually put to trial.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say, I had no idea of that. I know it sounds really, but I was so lost in all of this. I was basically, if people I trusted said, okay, we're going to move now over, I move now over. I actually thought it was a trial. Mm-hmm. I mean, I thought it was so intense. It was so overwhelming. It was so, I would come out of those depositions 3 different days. We would stand in the parking lot. Mike would hold me up while I cried because I'd never been talked to like that. I had never been doubted like that. I had never found myself not being able to give clear explanation. There was, like I said, everything drops in. There's no timeline to it. And they kept picking at that. And I was already picking at it within myself. Mm-hmm. And so they were turning me into, and so I have to say that I didn't understand that myself. And I've learned how to make sense out of that now, but I didn't at the time.
I think a lot of people didn't understand the difference.
Yeah, well, it's not easy. I mean, unless you're taught it. They file a motion to dismiss. You file a lawsuit, and they answer with motion to dismiss, and they list the reasons why the case could be dismissed. Like when I would file a lawsuit in a lead poisoning case where a child had lead poisoning that damaged them cognitively, and I would have evidence of that with blood tests and what have you. The other side would file a motion to dismiss and claim that there was not enough evidence to file such a case, where we would go and we would argue the evidence. We weren't in court as a trial. We were at a hearing. I would tell the judge why there was enough evidence to proceed to trial, and the opposition would say basically that I was full of shit. Mm-hmm. Say that in legal terms, and the battle of the lawyers back and forth. Mm-hmm. But if we had only succeeded in that statute of limitation issue, then we would have had our day in court. We never got our day in court. Never. We got beat up and away, basically.
I'm like pushing Shane out of because I have so many questions. I want to ask, and because this is video, he can't rearrange the chronology, but I want to go back to something that you both referred to, just to clarify for everybody. Paul McHugh was one of the leading proponents of something called false memory syndrome, and it went by FMS, but he was also under contract at Hopkins and was involved in the MK Ultra program. And I remember, Jean, you talked about that is pretty much of a conflict of interest, but could one of you explain the difference between false memory syndrome, because that's been debunked just in the last couple of years, and he won't talk to us, he's still living, and repressed memory, because repressed memory is, that's in the diagnostic Bible for psychologists, and they're 2 very different things, but people get them very confused on social media.
I think it's, what is it? It's dissociative identity disorder is what it's called now. Used to be, so there, but I won't go into great detail, but one of the things that I feel is false memory would be, this is how I see it. I'm going to explain it from Jean's.
Mhm.
If I came forward and said, I remember this priest, he did this, and this is this, and this. And if they could not have anyone else say that they ever knew anything like that, they could then stand behind that's the false memory. But to have Teresa come forward, separate from, away from, a different year then, and give almost the same kind of behavior, not to mention another person, I find that became for me the affirmation.
Mhm.
That cannot be in my mind, that we all have false memory. I've gone to therapists, Teresa hasn't. They want to say it's the therapist who has made suggestions. Teresa hasn't. It's like, for me, she affirmed that because I was my own worst detective. I had this child telling me all this stuff, and there was a separation. And so I was supported by the fact that I don't know that woman from the man in the moon. And she had this man do things to her too.
Mhm.
There's no way that could be a false memory in my
Right.
mind. There's a difference.
Right. And he really pushes that. He doesn't deny people have had trauma, but his claim is that to deal with the trauma, you make things up and you accuse people falsely because you are trying to deal with the trauma rather than, as you said, now there's a diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder, but he's kind of like a nobody now after being this leader in this whole false memory syndrome organization. Teresa, do you have any thoughts about him?
Yeah, back during our case, the repressed memory did not pass the Fry-Reed standard, which was an established standard for generally accepted occurrences.
Right.
And I have a case I actually found in Maryland where the Judge Rubin, this was in Montgomery County, said that dissociative amnesia has been sufficiently tested by psychiatry and the community using research methods generally accepted in these fields, and it is now generally accepted. And it's a real thing. They were able to prove a lot was on the post-traumatic stress disorder of returning veterans from war, and how they actually relived being in war, being bombed and all. And they saw it over and over again. And it has been studied, and it happens in the hippocampus of the brain, protecting from these horrible things. And then when they surface, it's reliving. I had that experience up all night, wondering how in the hell I got dressed at Maskell's office, and you relive it. You actually relive the touch, the feel, the smells, and it's proven now. Whereas the McHugh's thing about false memory syndrome, it just didn't hold water. A lot of times they were saying that psychiatrists were hypnotizing people, interjecting these thoughts. I was never hypnotized. Never did anyone ever inject in my mind about what I was remembering. And I knew it to be true. And there were other people coming forward. At one point, Beverly Wallace told me there was 30 Keough grads signed a letter of support that they knew something went on, at Maskell's. So it's just, if we had our day in court today, we would win. We could prove it.
Mm.
Could each of you talk about how the case concluded and what each of you did afterwards?
If it's okay, I'll start. Just to it ended where, I don't know what you call it if it wasn't a trial. What do you call it, Teresa, if it's not a trial?
the hearing, the motion to dismiss was granted.
Okay, the motion to dismiss was granted. And so we went to the appeal. After the appeals court said they were going to stay with what Maryland had decided. 2 weeks after, Mike fell off a roof and broke both his wrists. And so I thought that I was being, that I had told secret, and that God, if there be a God, was angry, and getting me back. We were in shock. This was never what we thought was going to happen. We really believed in all those. We believed in the church. We believed in the courts. We believed in the law. The law enforcement. It seemed as if everyone, and then it got silent. So it wasn't just that we were in shock, but everything got quiet. It was like I was afraid to talk. I had already said all these things. They're now letting it just go. So I felt I had told a secret. I felt very guilty. I felt terrified. Now these people were out there. He was out there. Didn't matter to me if they said he was in Ireland or I didn't care. He was out there. He was already here, but now he's out there. And we went into a kind of a silent mode around it. We moved away from my extended family and any kind of community, which I was already now very much not a part of. I continued to work on my inner work. I continued to raise my family. I started my healthcare practice, Light the Path. I helped Mike during that time with a peaceful transfer to the next level. So it was a time of a lot of growth, but I was really in hiding because I felt I had done something wrong and that nobody was talking about it. No one knew. We had told all the stuff that we had told in these depositions. We had talked to all these lawyers and it was not out in public, So we were stuck with all this stuff now. And I was still remembering things. So I was still working on that. So I just went into a silent, I stayed Jane Doe.
Yeah, I was devastated. I couldn't believe it either. I was devastated to the point where I wouldn't let it go. I took it to the Supreme Court. I got a lawyer to file a writ of certiorari to ask if the Supreme Court would hear the case. And even though my dad said the statute of limitations is a done deal, doesn't have a chance, he supported me in that. And I think he did because he saw, I think I was having a nervous breakdown and I had to do something. And of course, when that lost, my focus was law school to understand what the hell happened. Because those motions I just talked about, the hearings, and I didn't understand all that like I do now. But I had to go back and get my BA degree first in social work. It was a long road. So I just focused on my education and my kids. I think if I didn't have the kids, I wouldn't have made it because they gave me a purpose, to hang in there.
We're gonna take a minute and not a minute, as much time as you want. We're gonna fast forward to some of the challenges that you both faced when The Keepers was released. So we're not going to retell the movie because today, again, for our listeners and viewers, watchers is like a weird thing. Our viewers, we're talking more about legal battles and the battles that you both had with the institutions that betrayed you. So with the release of The Keepers and everybody meeting you with your faces on the screen, how did each of you, what challenges appeared and how did you each deal with that? Who wants to start?
First, Jane.
Teresa, this camera's on you. You want to keep talking?
I was terrified about the keepers. First of all, I didn't think it was going to be shown on Netflix. When they interviewed me, when Jess and Ryan interviewed me, I just thought it would be a document, on public TV or something. And when I realized it was going to be broadcast on Netflix and it was going to be a big deal, I was terrified. I thought I was going to come off as looking like a mental case because I always thought I was nuts. And then I didn't think people would believe me. I thought, well, here we go again. You're going to have everybody, telling you you're crazy. And then some people said, well, maybe there's going to be a target on your back because a lot of people think we're attacking the religion. And I never meant to attack anyone's faith. I respect everybody's belief systems, but I was terrified. The day it came out, I actually had to go to my doctor and get I had to have a colonoscopy done because I had so many symptoms. I told the doctor I was dying. And it was horrible. I couldn't even walk. I said, I'm dying. And but I'm pleasantly surprised when it came out and we got all that support. I was shocked. I was totally shocked. I stressed myself into an emergency situation because the doctor wouldn't have ordered that if I wasn't just about crawling into his eye, telling him I'm dying.
It is stress. I think that's the part that is so it's so sad about all this when they don't understand what survivors continue to go through. To talk about this is one of the hardest things to do. That's why a lot of people don't. I think it's why it had such a major impact because it wasn't just talked about, but it was talked about with integrity and respect and with a focus of educating and informing versus sensationalizing and tantalizing. It was not, and I made a point to say I will not be a part of a Girls Gone Wild because this is a hard thing to talk about, but they needed to talk about some of what happened in order to understand the depth of the crime. So it was I think for me, it was difficult too because I had outed myself as Jean Hargan and Wayner before they came along. And that in itself was already but I did that because I didn't want to become, I didn't want to talk to anybody, whether that was Tom Nugent with his, Inside Baltimore or anyone, because I needed to go to the police and tell them first everything that I had remembered from that point of the courts to now. I'm a good person. I do my civic duty, and I've done it ever since I put my name on this. So yeah, I felt I felt free and I felt terrified. I was free because I was talking about things and there were people who were in front of me that looked like they were really getting it. They were listening. I had hardly talked to anybody other than real close friends about any of what I had thrown up on the tables in those depositions at the archdiocese tables on, you'd never know by the way they all acted after with nothing, silence, whooped, that we had shared such horrific things. I mean, horrific. This is horrific. And if those people who are in charge, the big business behind the church, had records, moved those people around, knew that they were abusing children, the children of the parishioners, and then they stayed silent after we put ourselves through this. I don't know. I don't have words. because I am a good person. I was taught to be a good person. And a good person doesn't do that because we deserved better. Now I'll get off my.
No, this is why we're doing this. Yeah, it's why we're doing it today.
It just, Teresa, the stress, to me, it was so hard to do what we were doing. And we did it. We were making no money.
Right.
We didn't make anything at all from this. We did it because we had a right, for one, to speak our truth to an audience that might actually listen. We also knew by this point, because that we weren't alone in being a survivor. And so if it was that hard for us to talk about it, and then there were other survivors who also were talking about it. And I feel like it was a snowball in that respect. But I was terrified. It probably took me a year. I got off the grid after The Keepers came out. I went to my sister's for a weekend when it came out. I could only watch parts and sometimes certain parts not at all. And I was terrified. I was also afraid people were going to start throwing things at me. People were going to start looking me up in order to, call me names. That I still was dealing with this feeling like they're going to say I'm lying. This is not an easy thing to do. And so about a year, I would say, before I started feeling grounded again and feeling affirmed, to allow the affirmation to somewhat sink in. It took about a year, I'd say.
This question can go to anyone who would like to answer it, but I'd like to hear how the Archdiocese of Baltimore reacted to The Keepers.
Teresa, I'll let you start there.
They acted like it wasn't true, and that they didn't hear about the abuse as early as they did hear about it. And it was just more of the same lies, even with us coming forward and talking about all this horrible stuff. And then about Charles's revelation in The Keepers. He had no reason to lie about what happened to him. None of us did. Like Jean said, we got absolutely no money out of this. And the Archdiocese is the same old. We support the victims. We do this, we do that, and it's all a bunch of bull. They do not care, and I can't be convinced that they care.
Do you each remember how the Archdiocese answered the questions at the end of the series? They wouldn't be interviewed, but Ryan sent them questions.
Yeah.
And do you remember that? Can you talk about that? Do you remember that?
I just know that I was pissed.
Well, because they would say, see answer to number 1.
Yeah. It was so, talk about flippant. Again, I have Catholic friends. I'm not talking about participators within a faith.
Right.
I'm talking about these are the people who were the leaders of our faith. These are the people who taught us not to lie, taught us what it meant to tell the truth, taught us how to help the person who was down, taught us the things that we were doing. And the responses to me were as if we did not matter. The lawsuit had or whatever we're calling it, the hearing had already happened. We couldn't do anything. We were not going to be able to sue them. They needed to, I would say grow some balls, but I won't say that. They needed to.
You just did say
to
it.
do. They needed reconciliation. So that meant that they had to admit their part in this. And all they needed to do, again, we couldn't do it. We couldn't. They needed to speak up. They needed to get the courage to speak up. Just like they got threatened and ended up bringing the statute of limitations, age up during that time, because it was like, oh my God, they're filming this. What's going to happen? It took pressure. We were just asking for honest response. Mm-hmm. And I was angry. I still am. I still feel very much that we have not been treated with the same integrity and respect that that Ryan Waite and Jessica Hardgrave and John Benham showed us.
Correct.
Or Jim Maggio, Beverly Wallace, and Phil Dantes. Mm-hmm. We have not been treated with that kind of respect.
Do either of you remember what happened at Keogh when the keepers came out? The letters that went home and what the girls were told? Do you recall that, Teresa?
I remember the letters. I don't remember the content of the letters. I was still celebrating the reception that the keepers got, mm-hmm. and then out there and told. But yeah, they sent letters out to the people at Keogh.
Right, to the families at Keogh. And of course, there was talk began that year about closing the school. Big surprise, right? But the girls were told, and I've talked to a few of them. I mean, they're young, but they were told, and their moms, or would be our daughters, right? They were told not to discuss this with anybody, especially the media. And letters went out to every single parish in the Archdiocese of Baltimore, the same letter from, what's his name? Laurie, our Archbishop. And the priests were required to read the letter at every Mass after the keepers came out with the Archdiocese perspective on it. I'll see if I can find a copy of it and Shane can post it with this. But a lot of priests, there are a lot of good priests in this world. A lot of them who empathized and supported what you were doing refused to read that letter. And instead, they set up really productive discussion groups to talk about what can we do to help and how can we keep this from happening. So there are some renegade parishes out there that we have to give kudos to, but the Archdiocese really thought that they were just going to squash it. And they know that's not going to happen now that they've seen who they're dealing with, right?
I have... he wants, I'm going to leave him anonymous because I didn't ask permission, but a gentleman was a part of a board for one of the Catholic organizations. And they came in and there was a priest visiting, and the priest proceeded to imply that there were, that the keepers, there were lies. And this gentleman stood up and said, you need to stop talking because I know that family and they're not liars. Mm-hmm. And the priest stopped talking. Right. But he had come specifically to squelch the keeper's impact.
Good. Did either of you meet with Lori?
I was offered a meeting and I told him no.
Yeah, right. No. Yes. I know Lil did, and she told him off. She said the only good thing about it was his dog was there, and she said she told him off. So good for her. No. And Lil, everybody knows.
I felt it was empty, just empty, mm-hmm. And I can't even believe that this man is, even with that, that's the one thing that, after it's almost like this is the lead. He's the guy, He's the guy.
Well, this episode is going to be all over the world, and we're going to send copies to specific people. So if either of you would like to say something directly to Archbishop Laurie, who is still the Archbishop of Baltimore, here's your opportunity.
Hey, you should resign, Lori. You should resign.
I don't believe, because I've lost all trust in anything that you say. And I also feel that what has really opened up for me is the realization that until you bring women into your community of priests, you will always have this dysfunctional situation, because there is a balance that needs to happen. Has nothing to do with who's abusing who, but you are off balance and decisions are being made and the power is being held by just men. And when you have that, you have the potential of all kinds of havoc. So to me, please, please consider making a move in bringing women into the healthy balance of the hierarchy here in Maryland.